Hello and welcome to another episode of Desert Island Tricks. Now, we've got a bit of a special this week because we are approaching the end of our second year. That's right, we are fast approaching the end of year 2 of Desert Island Tricks, which is unreal. To think that this has now been going for 2 years absolutely blows my mind. And we've had so many incredible guests on. We've had so many great lists, and we've got more to come in the future, so stay tuned. But we often get asked, what is our most listened to episode? The answer, of course, is going to be Derren Brown. But with Derren Brown's episode, the really interesting thing is, in streaming, as in podcast platforms, and on YouTube, only a third of listeners have actually heard the second half of the interview, which we find bizarre. And we've tried to think about why this could be, but we think it could be that we just put it on 2 separate episodes and maybe people weren't aware that there were 2 halves of it. Maybe they thought it was just the same thing repeated. And I think that's such a shame because it was such a great talk. And it's one that I often go back to. I've listened to both parts several times over the past year and a half, and it's been such an amazing episode to listen back to. So what we decided to do as a little treat as we're coming to the end of season 2 is to take both halves of the Derren Brown episode, push them together and take the ads out. That means you have the opportunity to listen to the whole thing all the way through without interruptions and just enjoy it, because I know that I really enjoyed listening back to it and listening to those stories again. And then maybe, just maybe, we will have the same amount of people that have heard the first half and then get to hear the second half, because the second half is just as phenomenal. So just as a special treat, here is Derren Brown's episode in its entirety, both halves, beginning and end, without interruptions, just for you guys to listen to. Please listen back to this because it was such a joy and honor to record. And of course, we will be back next week with another episode of Desert Island Tricks. But for now, enjoy Derren Brown. Hello and welcome to another episode of Desert Island Tricks. We are really in for a treat today. It's somebody that, again, you guys have seen the title at this point. And you'll notice that this is the first videoed one that we have done. We may do more video ones in the future. But today's guest is... I really can't introduce him. So all I can tell you is my thoughts about this person, because I think that's just the nicest way to go. So this particular person that we have on today was someone who's actually from my home area. So when I was 11 and 12, and I come from Croydon originally, don't judge me, everyone. So I'm from Croydon originally. I remember being in it must have been year 7, year 8, and seeing all of the bus stops with this guy who's going to do this Russian roulette thing. And I remember very young watching this Russian roulette thing live and being absolutely on the edge of my seat. Probably shouldn't have been watching it that young, let's all be honest, but I'm glad that I did, because from that day forward, I was a huge fan of today's guest. So much so, I think I've seen pretty much all of the live shows. I've tried to collect as much. Obviously, growing up seeing his international lecture, which was just superb. And yeah, I think that my story is probably very similar to lots of people listening to this podcast and watching this podcast. I think the impact that he's had on our industry and on a lot of people as individuals is probably more profound than he would like to think. So with that being said, that's my introduction. But today's guest is the wonderful Mr. Derren Brown. Lovely to have you, Derren.
Thank you very much. That was very nice. I really like how you said that you come from Croydon originally. Everyone puts the originally on the end of Croydon, like they want to distance themselves from it. I don't live there anymore. I'm not, but I was there for a moment in my youth. It has blossomed into non-entity since I was last there. But I'm really fond of Croydon and Purley, where I actually kind of was, actually living just on the outskirts.
Well, I'm really interested to see what you're going to say, as I'm sure most listeners here, because obviously your roots coming into our industry wasn't necessarily mentalism per se. You were at one point known for your card magic, in particular Smoke, which was just fantastic. But you sort of then went on to some more of the mentalism and the hypnosis, and that's what you sort of become known for. So I'm not sure. I think there's going to be some card stuff on there.
There is, actually. This is a really interesting thing to think about. First of all, because, the brief I had, that these are tricks for the desert island. I understand if it's records to listen to. Records. I'm an old man. Music to listen to. But I did think, you must have had this conversation with a number of your guests, but who am I performing? I'm on a desert island. I'm just presumably just doing these for myself, and there's no one actually experiencing any magic. Although that hasn't stopped me in the past, I have to say. Probably fairly standard. And then I read further down the brief, and it said, no, these are tricks that you it's not so much about performing them on the island, it's that you can only perform these tricks for the rest of your career. And that made more sense. Then that was actually really a really interesting thing to ponder. And then you made me feel really bad just before we started talking, because you said that Preston Nyman, who's one of the best people in the world, had chosen some tenure tricks. A, of course, that's genius and brilliant as he is. And B, of course, I thought, oh, right, you're not really supposed to choose your own tricks. How much, more generous and how much nicer to not choose your own tricks. I've chosen all my own tricks apart from one, because I took that to mean you can only perform from your repertoire for the rest of your life. So yeah, forgive me upfront. Apart from one, these are all from my own repertoire. But I'm not very. It's been a long time since I kind of know what's come out, or what is sort of current in the magic scene. So it's perhaps no surprise that most of the things I remember are involve producing records and fingertips and old tricks. So yeah, I'm kind of a bit out of, and also so much mentalism has just turned to electronics and stuff, which is, I'm sure, lots of fun if you're doing occasional close-up gigs. But if you're touring a live show, you can't be doing any of that stuff. So I am a bit out of sync with what's in at the moment. So yeah, it's all my own stuff. Sorry.
Well, that's even more interesting though, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners will know a lot of your items. So we can play a new game that normally we can't play, which is, at this point, what do you think from Derren's material? If you're listening to this, which you are, because that's what this is, what tricks do you think Derren would put in there? I definitely think, give no confirmations here, I think Smoke has to be in there, because I think it created such a massive buzz when it came about. And one of our episodes, we had one of our guests has a version of Smoke that he released as an effect, and he would take that on his desert island with him. So it's still relevant.
Well, I can tell you some Smoke is not on the list because I was thinking very practically about this and who smokes nowadays. And when I did that trick for Andrew O'Connor and Michael Vine, who ran Objective and signed me up for the first TV show, and then they ended up giving me the gig. I did that trick in Joe Allen's in a restaurant in London, and just sort of lit up at the table and weren't even sat in the smoking section. And that feels just such an age ago that although I did think of having it on the list once I understood the brief correctly, and then I thought, well, no, I'd never be able to do it. So it would be a waste if I don't do 8 tricks the rest of my career. Having one that relies on smoking would be a bad move. So no, I'm afraid it isn't on the list, but it nearly was.
Oh, without all of the people at home playing Derren Bingo, you've just got that one wrong along with me.
They assumed.
So with that being said, if this is the first time that you are listening to this, today we are going to whisk Derren away
And
to...
the last.
And the last, potentially. We are going to whisk Derren away to his own desert island. When he's there, he's allowed to take 8 tricks with him, 1 book.
I got my own island, like David Copperfield.
Your whole island.
I hope you won't mind me saying this, but I knew somebody who went to David's island and said that they were sort of in the car with him doing a little bit of that sort of journey, I guess, from the plainlands to David's house. And said it was really interesting because basically he was on the phone having to deal with all the difficult practical stuff that comes up because something's flooded and the electrics are gone. And it was a real lesson in no matter how stratospheric you are and you can have your own island, ultimately we're all dealing with the sort of the ordinary, boring, annoying daily stuff. I found that a very comforting tale. Anyway, sorry, back to your private island.
So when Derren's there, he can take 8 tricks, 1 book, 1 non-magic item that he uses for magic. Particulars, who's there? How big is it? What's there? Are there animals there? Are there people there? All of that is in Derren's own imagination. We do not mind. The most important thing is these are the collection of tricks that Derren could not live without if that's all he could perform for forever. So with that being said, let's hop on your rubber dinghy and go to your desert island. So what did you put in your first position?
Well, it was going to be Copperfield's plane vanish. And I'll tell you why, because you probably haven't had that. I just figured, again, this is before I kind of read the entire email and just thought, hang on, I've got to think again. I need to get off this island. So, okay, make the plane vanish, great. But I can only presume that if they'd have brought the plane to the island for the trick, they're going to fly home in the plane as well. So I figured it wouldn't be too hard to get on that plane and leave the island. So that was going to be my first choice. Then I realized that wasn't the point. It wasn't like a puzzle room to escape the island. I did a puzzle room not that long ago in London, and it just so happened we got divided up into teams, and everybody in my team was gay, which just sort of happened like that. And we realized this halfway through, and then the joke was that we didn't escape, but we did. We decorate the place very nicely. There was a quiche in the oven. That was true. But the second choice then, after I disregarded that, this is the one that isn't my trick. And it's a card at any number. And the reason why I've chosen this one, it's not so much that I don't quite understand the sort of the Holy Grail aspect of it. Not really. And I haven't really performed it that much. But when I stopped doing when I stopped doing card magic after I released Devil's Picture Book, which is a DVD that's out there somewhere, and I no longer a DVD, which again showing my age, a streaming thing, not streaming, doesn't matter, download. I kind of, that was sort of it. I didn't really do any card stuff, and I just haven't for years. And then and this was actually going to be my book choice. I got hold of David Berglass's The Berglass Effects book, which is about card at any number. And it was the only magic book I'd read in a long time. It's the only one I really have read in a long time and since. What I love about it, and the reason it was my only connection with card magic over the years, really, since stopping, is that it is all about the participant or the spectator. I don't like the word spectator. It was suggest they're a kind of passive. They're just sort of watching something happening and sort of observing, which is sadly so much of what passes as magic. But they are. From the get-go, it's about their choices and their thoughts and their decisions and so on. And so much of card magic, like 98% of it, might involve you picking a card, but then you're very quickly into just watching the magician do stuff. I take this and look, I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to give them a shuffle, whatever. And for me, because I've sort of lost a bit of contact with card magic and I've sort of fallen out of love with it a bit. But a lot of magicians show me tricks. it really struck me how it immediately loses me within. I'm probably more sensitive to it than most people who maybe just aren't that interested in card magic or don't really think about it, but it immediately loses me. Whereas a trick that begins with asking me to think about something, asking me to make a decision on what my favorite card is or whatever, immediately just feels more interesting to me. I feel sort of, engaged. So, and it also appeals to me because, like, I think a lot of the best magic, you might have to improvise your way through it, and you've got a kind of a framework, and then you can sort of kind of play and take it to other places. So I, for a while, I did it just sort of, privately, I suppose. And I didn't do it enough to really, for it ever to properly feel ingrained, and I forgot the memory system, and which is ironic, isn't it? So I kind of left it. But for the short amount of time that I was doing it, it really felt like a really wondrous thing. And I remember sitting with a guy I was on tour with, and we sat at the bar, and he said, "I've never asked you to show me a trick. Would you show me a trick?" So I got out the deck of cards, and just did it. And it sort of, it was a bit of a golden sweet spot. He just kept naming a card and then kept cutting to it. Or it felt like again and again I could just do this sort of impossible thing. And it was lovely. And I know it left him with a really strong impression because I've spoken with him since. So yeah, so that's my first choice. I think it's unusual, and it's not particularly that the effect is particularly marvelous. I don't think. I think there's just something about from the get-go, it occupies a different space than most card magic. Now, having said about the effect, when I did magic in Bristol many years ago, one of my first restaurant jobs was at a restaurant called the Glass Boat, which isn't there anymore, and it was like a floating restaurant on the water. And I would do magic around the tables, and I approached a table, and I remember there were sort of a couple of guys there, maybe they're having a meeting, and I said, "Oh, hello, I'm Derren. I'm a kind of magician," which was always my way in. Can I show you something? And the guy said, and I had a deck of cards in my hand, and the guy said, "Oh, actually, if you don't mind, no, sorry, we're just in the middle of a meeting." And I went, "Oh, that's okay, no problem." And as I went to walk away, he said, "But Queen of Hearts, 13 cards down from the top." And he sort of said it in a jokey kind of way. So I sort of laughed, and that was the end of it. But of course, when I went around the corner, I thought, I presume he was just joking and being funny, but I will just check. And the Queen of Hearts was 13 cards down from the top. That really stayed with me. So, I mean, that's just one of those beautiful moments that I never asked him about it. I think by the time I had a chance to, he'd have gone, or I didn't want to, or something. But that certainly stayed with me. So I think under the right circumstances, it can be a pretty devastating effect.
So the version that you looked into, is it from Burglass's book?
I presume so. I presume that's the kind of the original version. I mean, yeah, I don't really know my way around any of the myriad of more modern versions, but they all seem to compromise somewhere that, a card is picked, or there's some kind of something that just puts the compromise in a very visible space, which I think is a shame. It's not really where you want it. The love of Burglass's effect is that you've got the number and you've got the card, and then you find your way after that. And you have to work with two random variables and a certain amount of chicanery that is helping you, but you have to really think on your feet, and that's lovely. It'd be a shame if it was sort of mechanical. That would take all the joy out of it.
Do you think it's still one of those effects as well that lends itself to close up in a intimate situation rather than on stage, or do you still think that there's a place for it on stage?
Oh, it's a good question. I can't really imagine it working very well on stage. David Burglass was a master at taking small close-up effects and making them work very well on stage, and finding giant versions of that. I never saw him do, if he had a stage version of Card at Any Number, which I presume he did. I didn't ever see it, so I'm sure he'd have found a way of making that really work. I think because in my gut, because it's the sort of trick at its best that you don't necessarily know where you're going to, well, you kind of know where you're going to end up, but you don't know how you're going to get there. That's a safer thing in an intimate setting. I think on stage, matters of pace and structure and so on are a little more pressing. So I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it on stage at all. But I'm sure David had some great solutions to that. I'm going to blow my nose now. Excuse me.
Great, really, really interesting first choice as well. It's not one that I would have thought of immediately either, but it's a great one. And again, lots of people are going to have that book, so hopefully it will reignite their passion to go check back through that book, find one of those routines, and work on it.
All the fun of it is in the nuances and the just brilliant ways of getting around certain problems. And I think you need to have lived and breathed it for a long time, as David did, to have found those. So yeah, it's a terrific book. So
that brings us straight onto your second trick. So I'm guessing we're going to go for one of your own now.
I'm afraid so. I don't say any of this because I think these are better than other people's tricks at all. Far from it. But they're just tricks that I'd sort of worked for a long time when I used to do close up. Some of these are taken from my stage stuff. And this trick I included in Notes from a Fellow Traveller, which is the book that I've got out at the moment for magicians. And although it's really about performing and about, I think how to just make your magic more impactful, I did want to include some tricks in it. So I put this in it because it was one of my favorite close-up things that I did. And it was almost over before it started as an effect. It's called, by the way, it's called Watch to Sock, in that it needed a name. But that doesn't quite perhaps sell it. But what I'd approach someone at a table, I'd introduce myself. Oh, hi, I have something for you. Would you mind standing up? And I'd stand them up and I'd lift my trouser leg so that the bottom of the trouser came up, and they'd see there was a lump in my sock. And as if you any idea what that is, it is for you. No, and I said, go on, reach in and take it out. So they'd sort of bend over and reach into my sock, and it'd be their watch. And because I hadn't spoken to them before or anything, it was just a really, hopefully, really surreal, odd, quick thing. And if it worked well, I normally wouldn't do anything else at that table. I'd just leave it at that. And I was really fond of it. And it sort of came from watching Carl Cloutier. He had a gimmick that he used for getting a card into his sock, which was essentially a kind of silk sheath. It was like a tube that would go from his pocket. He had like a false pocket in his trousers that would just be a bottomless thing that would go down into the sock. And with a bit of adjustment, and I found a way of making a similar thing for a watch, which is kind of easier in a way because it's a heavier object. So as long as you can steal a watch while you're standing somebody up, and then, so I've got something for you, and at a couple of pockets, you can drop this thing in. I loved all the tricks I did going around these the restaurants I worked in. Again, this is in Bristol, really more than anywhere, many years ago. Were all things that I kind of dreamt up. I didn't have anything else to do, so I'd spend my days walking around, thinking up ideas, and then going out and trying them in the evening. And I remember I was very much into stealing watches, and I remember one lady. I remember me saying to her, I'd stolen the watch and I had it in my sock, and I was just trying different ways with the trick. So I said, "Oh no, I didn't have it in my sock. I had it in my pocket. That's right. This was before I had the tube." And I said, do you have the time?" Or some not very imaginative way into making her realize I'd stolen her watch. So she went to look at her watch, saw the bare wrist, and said, "Oh no, don't have my watch with me. It's at home." Which I thought was an interesting starting point for a trick, because I had a watch in my pocket. So I said, "Oh, okay. Whereabouts is it?" She said, "Oh, it's on my dressing table." Obviously, she just misremembered. Presume she hadn't put it on. I don't wear it very often. So I got her to describe it to me. And then I sort of held my hands out, put my hands together like this, and said, put your hands over mine and describe it as vividly as you can so you can really see the thing. And then, of course, I made it appear in my hands and then said, no, can you see it? Asked everyone else at the table if they could see it. I said, great, I'll take it. And when you go home, you'll find it isn't on your dressing table and so on. So that was fun as well. So pickpocketing, watch stealing, all of that was definitely part of the repertoire. But yeah, watch to sock is my second selection.
Great, really interesting one. Now, the thing with stealing watches is the revelation of the watch at the end. Now, if you are a pickpocket magician, then that revelation, absolutely fine. It's perfect. It's part of your persona. But was that born from the frustration of not having a way to reveal that watch afterwards?
I think it came out of just the joy of seeing Carl Cloutier's trick. I think it was that. And it just seemed like a watch. It's fun when if you can take two ideas and then combine them into one. And what I loved about it was the grammar of it, that the trick was over before it had started. Because also, the person's being stood up. You need that distraction to steal the watch, but also there's no, there's no sense that anything has started. So I think it was just the joy of that. But yes, you're right. The sort of, the trouble with a lot of pickpocketing is the reveal and how you make it more interesting. Apollo Robbins has got some really lovely thoughts on that. It reminds me actually of a running gag on Showman, which was the last stage show that I did. So the guys backstage at the time, I think it was Alex Hansford, a chap called Tom Barford who came in later, and Andy Frost and Bradley Hodgins, who you may know at least three of those, if not all four, as amazing magicians. But a running gag, which just became hilarious, was to just hold up a random object behind someone's shoulder was in the middle of a conversation. So I'd be talking to Brad, and Andy would just be next to Brad, and then whilst talking to Brad, I'd just see Andy just hold up a wallet or just his own, just some random thing off the table. But that kind of became funny, particularly funny when you're on stage trying to do a show and it's happening in the wings as they try and make you laugh. That was funnier in real life than it was as a story.
Well, I was going to say, what was the funniest thing that they managed to hold up that made you laugh?
Okay, well, the honest answer to this. So many years ago in Enigma, I think it was Enigma, or maybe Evening of Wonders, I forget, they're all the same. There was a trick that involved a deck of cards and a die, I'm so sorry, and something else, I can't remember what, but rolled up in silver foil, and then I kind of got my hands on it. I'm reading the number on the number on the die or whatever it is. Anyway, I would have a little bit in that where I would have to put myself into a sort of a state in order to do it. And I would use the moment to have a little vocal warm-up, which is quite a handy thing to do in a show. And also it involves making weird noises. So then the audience would laugh, and then I would laugh, and I'd have like a little corpsing moment where I couldn't carry on for a moment because I was laughing because they were laughing, sort of thing. But of course, after you do that a few nights, and it's sort of it isn't really necessarily that funny to do. So I said to the guys, feel free, if you want to make me laugh in the wings, this would be a really good point to do it, because I've got a really clear view into the wings. I've got three people on stage looking at me, but they're not, I'm looking past them into the wings, so feel free. So I remember Ian Sharkey was on that show, and he really went to great lengths. He was wearing my clothes one night that I left him in the dressing room with a sign saying I'm not wearing any pants. He was just in my pants another night. He was the Spirit of Theatre one night as well, with a sun and moon that he cut out and was dancing around. Anyway, none of this actually was funny. Like in the moment, it was just like, oh, okay, he's doing that. But it like wasn't actually, whatever weird head state you're in doing a show, it wasn't actually that funny. And then one night, my now ex-partner, Mark, came to see the show. And they said, look, if you want to try and make Derren laugh at this moment, do. Mark, He dropped his trousers and pants and squatted in the wings. So I'm in the middle of this trick, and I look and I see this sort of pink shape. I'm like, oh, Jesus. And also, I'm very aware that he won't have any real sense of what can be seen, like because you're very aware, like when you're in the wings as a professional, that the people at the far end of the first row will be able to see you. But there I am looking at my then partner, squatting unpleasantly, knowing that he can be seen by, and then he saw. So I did start laughing for the first time. He started laughing, and then very quickly tried to get up and hide. But unfortunately, he had his trousers and pants around his ankles, so he sort of fell and rolled towards the stage and became even more visible. I don't know who saw him. I just carried on with the show and hoped no one else would notice. And then I thought, what is people's experience of, what are they thinking? What are the rest of the crew thinking? Oh, he has them waiting in the wings. Anyway, so yeah, that was that. Probably shouldn't have told that story. It's not very pleasant.
I don't even know where to go from this point. So let's just go straight on to number 3. So what was in your third position?
Straight from number 2. So this is also in Notes from a Fellow Traveller. I wanted to put my sort of the few things that have sort of lingered from my sort of close-up days. It's so weird how you kind of lose a sort of muscle for it, really. So this became I'm sure like a lot of magicians and mentalists. There's a sort of a holy grail as to what you can do if people stop you in the street and ask you to do something. And bizarrely, it doesn't really ever happen. It used to happen a lot to me. It doesn't really so much now, but certainly for a long time, I thought I need an answer to this question. And I knew I didn't want to carry any props around with me. So that just kind of made it more of a creative challenge as to what the propless version of it would be. However, I did have one prop that had just become part of my everyday stuff, and that was one of those ring flight cases, if you remember those. So I guess this trick has gone through different iterations since, but the first version of that was a like a reel in a key case. So I just used to have it in my key case, and then years later I stopped doing close up, but I just still had this thing on me, so it didn't feel like a prop. And I so I thought, well, I could. There's that. Like that's a prop that I got on me, but I know vanishing somebody's ring, it would be a very weird thing for me to do that. It's not really kind of part of my world. So one of the things I talk about in this book is ways of doing close up in particular, or types of tricks where you can extricate yourself from the climax of the trick. In other words, that I think part of the reason why magicians and mentalists often seem smug is that we often don't know what to do with the moment when the trick hits and the person goes, "Wow, that's amazing," and you're like, like, how do you, what do you do with that moment? So for someone a bit introverted like me, like the best solution is, well, just don't make sure you're not there for that moment, and just let it be an entirely personal, private experience for the person. So I started looking at how would you do this, and I remember I was in Morocco smoking one of, I think, the 3 cigars that I've had in my life. It's horrible. With Fergus Flanagan, I'm sure you know. And we were talking about this sort of problem. Anyway, so the solution was, it was a couple of things we came up with that night. And one of them was this, I don't know exactly, I think I call it, what do I call it? A trick with a key? What do I call it? I'm actually looking at the contents of the book, but it's a really big book, as I can't find it. Anyway, a trick with a key, I think I call it. So what else could you do? What would be a mentalism trick using that prop? So the scenario would be somebody stopping in the street and saying, "Can you show me a trick?" I guess they wouldn't stop in the trick less than you, but if getting into it like an impromptu situation. And and I've only done this really a few times, but it's worked very well when I have. So I'd say, well, we have met before. Do you remember? And they're like, no, we haven't met. No, we've met before. We met in Timpson's in the key cutting place. Do you remember? No. Yep, you should remember, you were getting your key cut, your front door key cut. And then, and I said to you that we would meet again. You don't remember any of this, do you? No. Perfect. Okay. Show me your front door key. So they'd give me their front door key. I'd have a look at it, and then I'd throw it away. So ideally, I'd sort of maneuver this near a manhole cover, or maybe it's off a bridge, or somehow I would throw their key away, by which point I normally switched it for a coin or something that looks quite realistic as it flies through the air or down the manhole cover, a little glint of metal. Anyway, so now you're in quite a nice position. And then I would say, it's okay. We've done this before. You gave me another copy of your key, and I said that we would meet here today. In fact, hang on, and I get my keys out, and I go through my keys and goes, think it's this one? No, it's this one. It's not exactly the same as yours. Yours had the little owl on the front. This one doesn't, but it's close enough. But that should open your front door. And I give them the key and leave them with it. And then they've got their whole walk home with this key, thinking, why does Derren Brown got my front door key on his key ring? And then the lovely moment when they're going to actually try it in their door and it's going to open their front door. It just seems to me that that's a really lovely way of doing magic, and just not making it about yourself in the moment, just giving them something to go away with. So that was one of two thoughts. The other thought, I'm going to go with that one because that just created such a lovely kind of creepy, weird thing. The other one I won't go into now, but that's in the book as well. But I thought it was a fun and sort of counterintuitive way of approaching the effect of a trick, and a use for I think a really good prop. And also, there's no ring to lose. I mean, we've all done that. We've all done the trick and heard the ting, ting, ting as this person's ring is, in my case, falling down a stairwell behind me. So, yeah, no rings to lose either.
I wish I was a spectator in that moment, though. And I know that we don't often get moments like that ourselves nowadays. But I would love to be in that moment and to have that walk home and to think, what on earth has just happened? It sort of reminds me of, in your last show, you had the deck under box, and obviously, without giving too much away, it's available online. I think you can go and see it. So I don't want to give too many spoilers to that. But there's
that might be my number 5 trick.
Oh. Well, then people will find out. I won't say anything more about that. But that has that same moment where it almost feels like, I mean, being in the theatre, the sad thing is that people won't necessarily be in the theatre when that happens. But for me, being in the theatre and hearing an onslaught of people around you genuinely start questioning life in general and what's going on to them, it's just amazing. So, yeah, that moment would be incredible. It would be that moment where you walk back and go, are aliens real? What's happening here?
It's also one of, I mean, this key trick. It's also a rare example of where you get to have an argument with your participant, because you've just thrown their key away and you're giving them another one and then leaving them. I mean, that's if they believe that that's really what's going on. That is an argument. They're not going to go, oh great, oh wow, I can't wait to go home, and there will be an argument, which I think is always fun.
That's a great choice, and that brings us to your halfway point. So what's in your 4th position?
Okay, so by this point, I'm thinking I've got to actually think about my career here, continuing, and what would be the sort of absolute stalwarts that I continue with. So I've chosen for this the Oracle Act, which was my Q&A act from, again, one of those shows. Evening of Wonders or Enigma, I think. Anyway, but I also did it in on Broadway, so it's gone through a few versions, and I'm choosing it because I mean it's a sort of potentially could be a show in itself. In fact, I did a TED talk that was just the Oracle Act, or at least half of it. So it, although at the beginning, actually, it's an interesting thing with these shows, and that was 3-4 shows in that we did that. We often sit down. I say we, I mean me and Andrew O'Connor and Andy Nyman when we're writing the shows, or Stephen Long and Ian Sharkey on Svengali. But we're often thinking, what are the sort of classics of mentalism that I haven't done? And a thing often happens that I often find myself a little resistant at first. Like I didn't think a Q&A act was that interesting. It just felt a bit old-fashioned. I think probably maybe it's done more now, but certainly at the time it wasn't. And then you do it and you realize why it works and why it is such a mainstay of mentalism. I had the same experience with the psychometry routine in Showman. So which I wasn't sure which one to use actually for this, but I ended up going with the Oracle Act. But again, I wasn't sure about doing psychometry, because isn't that just returning things to people, their objects in bags? And it just, again, and I kind of thought, well, maybe there's a more interesting version of it, but it just didn't feel at first glance that interesting. And then I just made it about the objects and the people, not really about whose object was who. In fact, sometimes I'd get that bit wrong. And it became, like, for me, the most gorgeous moment in that show to perform, and also became a sort of emotional way through to where the show was going at the end. That was important structurally, but it was just sort of, it's a very lovely thing to, as with both this and the Oracle, to not really know quite where you're going, that you've got certain things in place magically to sort of guarantee you this sort of, framework. And then after that, you just got to really sort of think on your feet. And it's all about really kind of creating a sort of a tone, and then just getting that tone right. And it's a really lovely experience. And there aren't many times in a show where you get to have that. And it's a bit like time stops, and if you're going out for dinner after the show or something, and it is tempting to think, in the middle of a more mechanical trick, it's very common to be thinking, oh, we're going out for a tie after this. Oh, that'd be lovely. Your mind can start to do that. Whereas the lovely thing about something like the Oracle or whatever is that there's none of that. You're completely present with it. And on top of that, certainly when we did it on Broadway, it was sort of lit very beautifully. And I never get to see what the show looks like because I'm facing the wrong way. But by all accounts, it looked beautiful as well. So, I always do it in a white tie, and I've got bandages around my head. You try and create a strong visual image. But yeah, I think for that experience, that rewarding experience as a performer of having to be totally present with it, and also unavoidably feeling like you're stepping into a tradition that's, had its heyday, I guess, probably in the sort of 20s and 30s, but and for good reason. And also, like all the best things, from a magical point of view, it's so simple, and there's sort of really nothing to it. And I remember a very, very seasoned and knowledgeable magician saying to me, I can kind of get my head around how you did it at the start when you were sort of doing it with people's questions that they'd written in envelopes, but then you stopped using the envelopes. And I just don't know how, it's lovely to know how, or just for something to have, it's like a big psychological story that everybody's getting caught up in because it's so kind of emotionally sort of appealing, and it's such a fun sort of ride that you kind of, hopefully you just sort of stop questioning too much in the audience, stop trying to work it out, and also realizing that it's all about the information that you're giving, and which again is something I've read, is something I knew in theory, that no one really cares how you're doing it. It's what you're revealing. But that's really true. But that's an amazingly liberating thing, because then you can design you, and I make sure when I do that Q&A that I've got this control over the shape of the material I'm giving. I've got I can mold it in a way that it'll have an arc and so on. But you just get to play with what is the most extraordinary and sensational stuff, and sometimes you can just make that up, and that will just fly. I mean, those are the best moments of stuff you're just making up. So yeah, that's a wonderful thing, and I think that given that could be an act in itself, I would definitely have to keep that as one of my 8 tricks to continue with, and I still do it in my sort of corporate act on the rare occasions when I do that.
I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it's in Miracle, you have sort of a mini Q&A. I recall having people sort of sat into almost bleachers, and then I think that's where you lift someone up. I think that's where that ends. But you do like a mini Q&A, but I think you preface it by saying, this is all made up. None of this is real. This is all made up.
Yeah, so that was it. It was in Infamous, and it was it came out of. It's interesting how sometimes the best things come out of mistakes and real limitations. So it was a real lesson. So we had 52 seats come out on stage. It was the end of Act 1, and the whole scene, the whole set transforms into a cathedral. There's a guy who's been put to sleep and is in this whole kind of sarcophagus thing, wheels on, and he's going to be asleep during the interval. And all these trucks, they're called, but the seats come out and there's smoke, and it was going to be for a giant card at any number trick in the second half, and then we took that out because there was a couple of card tricks which just felt a bit too much. So, but we were left with all this big transformation scene and all these seats, so we couldn't not use them. So one afternoon, having ditched the card at any number trick, we're looking at 52 seats, going, what else could this be? And it struck me that it looked a bit like a studio audience set up in a studio, which always makes me think of those sort of dodgy mediums when they have their TV shows and they're doing stuff with an audience. So that became that. Because let's do some mediumship, and then it's how do you make mediumship interesting? And I think it stayed with me, this, because I think theatrically it was interesting, because as you say, I'm saying this, I'm making this up, this is rubbish. So yeah, I've got your aunt here, her name is Jan, is that right, Auntie Jan? And they'd be like, yes, and she's not saying anything, of course, I'm lying to you, but she's saying blah blah blah, and it would go back and forth like that, and it just kind of occupied this interesting space. I think we get rather caught up, particularly as mentalists, between, are you saying it's real or it's not? Are you this or this? Like, it's a very binary thing. And I don't think ultimately your responsibility is to that particular ethical question. I think your responsibility is a theatrical one. And actually having this sort of other thing in the air, which isn't how is he doing it or is he real? It's just this sort of kind of, two ideas battling it out in your head. He's saying it's rubbish, but at the same time, he's saying stuff that's, impossibly accurate. That just felt like a really interesting sort of place to sit. And I remember really early on in the tour, I came out at stage door, and there was a girl there, and, bright girl, maybe like in her early 20s, and she said, I wonder if you could put me in touch with my grandmother who's passed away. And she'd just seen the show. And I said, oh, God. I said, I'm so sorry. I really hoped it's clear from the show that I can't really do any of that stuff. And she went, oh, yeah, no, I know you can't do any of that stuff, but I just wondered if you could put me in touch with her, which was such an interesting thing for someone to say, and said so much about how we are happy to sort of balance these completely contradictory narratives when it comes to this kind of stuff. What we emotionally want to believe and what we intellectually know can be so different. So yeah, that was interesting. And I think that the best stuff in any show, certainly as a performer, doesn't necessarily translate to the audience's experience, but is when you get to improvise and just have to really, really think on your feet. It's a treat if you're doing 300 shows.
You mentioned that you still do it in your corporate. Do you still get to a stage where that same thing happens to you? So people come up to you and they want you to have talks with their dead relatives, etc., etc., or has it died out completely now?
I find it's died out. I mean, I never do tricks on, I mean, I avoid chat shows and stuff anyway, but if I am ever a guest on something, I never perform. And that was a rule right from the very start, which is a bit surreal, really, as a rule, but that kind of served me well. And I think because I'm never doing that stuff in interviews, it sort of maybe doesn't occur to people that I'll just do that stuff at the drop of a hat. And yeah, people don't really ask. And if they do ask, it's normally like somebody being a bit rude anyway. Like it's just like, I'm having dinner here and they want me to, can you come to our table and love you to, but so rarely happens. And if it does, I said, if it's a bit rude anyway, I don't feel bad going, I'm sorry, I'm having dinner, whatever. Or we've met before in Timson's, or however the mood takes me. So no, not too much nowadays. But there's sort of other strangenesses that come instead from being well known and from doing the sort of stuff that I do and from the way people respond to anything remotely hypnotic or the card trick that you mentioned in Showman, that really was very triggering for a lot of people. I mean, it's a card trick, but it upset a lot of people. So the stuff I have to deal with is that rather than I'd love it if it was just, can you put me in touch with a dead relative? That would be relatively light.
Great. So that brings us over your halfway point. So so far we've had an ACAN, we've had the watch in sock, we've had the, I'm going to call it key and river or the key trick.
The key trick, yeah.
Cool.
I like they didn't have names. It's quite nice not having names. It's a bit like I've never really kind of been very specific about what I do. And I like the fact none of my tricks really have names apart from smoke. So number 5.
Yes. So what's in your 5th position?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's no particular order to these, but this is where I've got the card to box trick from Showman, and I think the origin of this came from the brilliant, mysterious author of The Jerks, whom I love all of that, and he had a use for the invisible deck where I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was something like you convince the person that they've put the card, they've turned the card around themselves and that you've made them forget it, that you've sort of hypnotized them. And I'd always loved Jay Sankey's trick. I don't know what it's called. But it's such a brilliant thing where you make somebody forget a card that they've just seen, and it's a mechanical card trick that this one person seems to have forgotten, and everyone else knows they were just looking at a totally different card. So I've always loved those ideas because it creates something bigger. It just creates a bigger question is in the air than just how you did that or how you found the card or whatever the normal questions often are for magic. So one of my mainstays when I used to do my hypnosis shows was that on a certain cue, people would get up and go and do something and come and sit back down again and have no memory of doing it. And it was always really fun watching somebody think through the fact that that their wallet was over the other side of the stage, or that someone else had it in the audience when they were just really holding on to it, because by this point, it's the 5th time it's happened. So they've sat on their wallet, and then seemingly 3 seconds later, it's not there. So it felt like this could be a fun thing. So the trick, if people haven't seen it, is it's a 3-stage trick, and the first stage is somebody comes up out of the audience. I sit them down at the table. There's a strange moment where I do a sort of hypnotic induction thing, and then the microphone goes off, and they we don't hear this little bit of a conversation I have with them. And then I tell them that I'm going to do a card trick. They pick a card, and there's a box on the table, and I say, put your hand on the card, and we've all seen what it is. It's going to disappear from under your hand and appear in the box. And I say it'll happen on the count of 3, and we go 1, 2, and then all the lights go out, and there's a long pause. And I say 3, the lights come back up, and the card's in the box, and it's sort of funny, but seems more like a gag. And then I explained to them how it worked. And I said, it worked because you put it in the box. When you came and sat down, I put you to sleep, you won't remember. And I told you that you'd put it in the box yourself and you won't remember doing it. And they don't believe that. It just seems like a silly explanation. So we'll do it again, but this time we'll leave the lights up. And I take the box, put it on the floor this time, and we do it again. And sure enough, between 2 and 3, as I count from 3, the guy gets up, walks around, puts the card in the box and sits back down again and has no memory of doing it. And also we film it, and then I could play it back to him. So now he watches on the screen himself getting up and doing it. And then the third phase, which is the most satisfying, is doing the same trick on the audience. So this time we say, okay, we'll do it again, but this time we'll get somebody to guard the box. And there was a real issue with this trick, is keeping the logic of it right. So, and it sounds silly, but I mean, it was like, we all know how it's working in the audience. So why are we guarding the box? Why are we upping the stakes? So it was all about it was all for this person on stage. Well, if you think I'm just doing it with some sleight of hand, look, this time we'll get someone to guard the box. So someone's guarding the box, which is hanging from a rope. Someone's staring at that from the audience, not going to take their eyes off it. This time he's going to sign the card, and he's got his hand on that on the table. Count to 3, and then I say, before I count, to the audience, this will work with some of you as well. And then I count 1, 2, and then there's a sort of a glitch. The lights go out for a second, and 1, 2. Is it 1, 2, 3 or 1, 3? Or is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? God, I can't even remember. Somehow I've missed out numbers. Is it 1, 2, 5? It's 1, 2, 5, isn't it? I'm sure that's it. Yeah, sorry, it's counted to 5, not counted to 3. I think. Anyway, there's a glitch, and the number. I haven't counted all the numbers, whatever they are, and the card's gone from under his hand, and the chair I was sat on is over the other side of the stage. It's underneath where this box was hanging. The box is swinging, and sure enough, his signed card is in the box on the other side of the stage. But the audience had missed it too, and that's the moment that you were talking about earlier, which it was so interesting doing this for the first time, because what follows that moment is us walking over to the swinging box, it coming down, the person saying, no, I never took my eyes off it. They can't understand. The person guarding the box can't understand what's happened, and the person takes the box and opens it up and takes it out, and sure enough, it's their signed card inside. It's a really good card trick, and there was like a lot of thought that went into it, but no one's paying any attention at all, because the whole audience are just like, did you just miss that? They're all having this sort of, there's just this murmur and sort of a general hubbub and confusion. So I'm just carrying on, and night after night, I kind of got used to it. I'm carrying on with the trick, knowing that no one is listening or watching, to get to the end of this terrific card trick, which of course also owes a lot to Guy Hollingworth. Just to credit him where that's due. So that was such a joy to do, and part of it, it never not worked, and every night I was sort of like, I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. So there was a real tension for me in it, which made it really fun, and we had a sort of plan B and C that we, when I say we, I mean me, and also, but if I change anything, all the lighting and sound, all that's got to change too. So as a team, we sort of had this like a backup plans, but never had to use them. It always just worked. Some nights better than others, in terms of how the person behaved, and what their sort of, just how entertaining it was, I suppose. And sometimes people, when they're on stage, especially when there's something hypnotic in the air, they can they start to feel like they're playing along, which is so annoying. Or sometimes they do the opposite and they just go a bit sleepy, which is also kind of takes the edge off it. So it really varied as to what the trick felt like, but it always worked. And always had this sort of jeopardy to it, and always had this just gorgeous moment of just knowing that this sort of bomb was just about to sort of land in the audience, as it were, not an actual bomb. Was lovely. So I adored that. And then, of course, the kicker of the trick, which I'm forgetting, is at the very end of the show, the audience had then played the time that they'd missed, which is the footage of the person walking across the stage and putting the card in the box. The thing that they all missed, or most of them missed. I remember a really interesting thing of I was in Birmingham and I'd been to see a physio a couple of times there because I had some problem with my back or something. And as often when I'm at a physio, I end up talking a lot about having a whole discussion with them about, pain and the show Miracle, where I was doing the faith healing. And I ended up inviting this guy to come and see the show. And he came with his wife and he said, oh, you're probably, whatever you're going to do, you'll probably get me because I'm really suggestible. I'm always being hypnotized. My wife's not, though, but you'll probably get me. I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe you'll end up on stage, whatever. Although I never get people up that I know, but that was that. And then he came and saw the show. And then he came out afterwards. I've got to get this right because it was really right. So he told me that he was very hypnotizable. Anyway, he comes around afterwards. So after this trick has finished the show, and he said it was really interesting. You didn't get me at all. Actually, it didn't fool me. The card trick didn't fool me, but it completely fooled my wife. We had a big argument about it. In fact, afterwards, I remember seeing the guy walk across. I totally saw him walk across, but she didn't. She fell for it. She forgot the 10 seconds. And it was a really interesting thing to kind of unravel that he was so suggestible that he had filled in the time for himself and convinced himself that it had happened. And of course, it hadn't worked for her in the same way. She'd just seen what, a non-suggestible person would see. But that had meant in his mind that she'd fallen for it. It was just a really kind of interesting, confusing moment for me in the dressing room afterwards. So yeah, that was a really a real delight. And then after that, I killed a fish.
Yes, you did towards the end. What was great, I mean, you're never going to have the experience of it, but from being in the audience, that effect actually had sort of like a two-parter in terms of the reactions, because I remember having one person to my left who it had worked sort of. So they were like, yeah, well, I don't know. I don't think it really happened. And then I had someone on my right, this lady who was just, my God, how's he done that? I'm not. This doesn't normally work on me. Just pure shock. And then the end of the show happens, so they get to see this part. And there was a moment where the guy on my left completely switched, and the whole ground beneath him just swallowed him up. And it's almost like he couldn't backtrack, but he couldn't also admit to himself that he'd been caught with it. Yeah. So he didn't know where to go with it. He didn't know how to digest it. He couldn't really talk. He couldn't compute what was going on at all. So it was lovely that if you didn't get them the first time, you were going to get them by the end of it.
Yes, I suppose that's a good point. It's like a pincer movement, isn't it? It's going to get you one way or the other. But it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was really surprising how upsetting that trick was for some people. So we started getting like angry letters about it. And like the first time someone was really upset about it, it's easy to kind of think, oh, well, it's just, someone that's upset about it. It's a bit odd, but I hope they're okay, and can't do much about that. But then it became a bit of a, not a regular thing, but certainly enough to kind of really pay attention to the extent that I then had to change the trick and put in, don't take part in this. Close your eyes now if you suffer from any form of PTSD, or if you've if you, I can't even quite remember what the list of things was, but I think PTSD was the big one, or whatever passes for PTSD nowadays. Because I think the idea of first of all, suppressing a memory and being made to forget something is potentially a delicate one. If you've had bad stuff happen to you that you have suppressed, and also it's quite a violating thing, just the idea that you could really get inside someone's head without their permission. Which, of course, to me is just what I do, and I don't really think about it as anything that's going to be upsetting for people as an idea. But I think it all the things you're saying there, like that the ground can really fall out from beneath you, and how that can mean really different things to different people. So there we were with a card trick that was causing proper distress to some people, not just being angry, but like, people, shaking, in tears, sobbing, just really weird situations that kind of like came out of it. So that was fascinating, because I've often had moments like that when I've taught, particularly if there's anything sort of hypnotic in the show. But we didn't think that the card trick would be what would get people there the most. So yeah, you never know. And then of course, you do have to change it. You have to be, take those things seriously, and you want to find a way of changing it that doesn't soften the effect, in fact only adds to it. And then of course adding in a disclaimer: do not take. In fact, I would say leave the theatre now if you suffer from any of these things, including PTSD and others. Go step outside, and the ushers will bring you back in. And of course, all of that only adds to the electricity of the moment, but was a genuinely necessary thing to call for, because you don't want to just soften the effect and make it half as good because a small percentage of people are triggered by it. You want to respond to that responsibly, whilst also having a responsibility to the show and the rest of the audience. It was a tricky and interesting one, all of which is covered in Notes from a Fellow Traveller,
which I've got my little copy here.
You've got one in the background. I love it.
I do have it there. And there's your deck of cards as well, which was also very interesting. It was like a little virtual online hunt that we had to go through.
I met someone the other day who had won that. I never... so when we produced the deck of cards, Jonathan Baim, who I guess runs Theory 11, he suggested, well, let's put some kind of treasure hunt or something in. Sometimes we do these things. And so, I mean, you literally... I'll say it's all over now, so I don't think there's any problem with me saying it. If you bought the boxed edition, then in the box there was a little card with something on it. But if you felt inside the envelope, do you know any of this? Have you done it?
Yeah, I've got the envelope up there as well. Yeah.
You felt inside the envelope there was a message in Braille, and it was some numbers. Like who is going to do that? But clearly some people did. If you take those numbers as coordinates, I think you get to Todmorden, which is a town in the north of England that I did one of my shows in. So now you realize you must be onto something. There's a sort of a running thing, I think, in the packaging around this book, around the deck of cards, that it looks like a book, and I think there's a reference to a title. I can't remember what it is, but either way, if you Google, you're going to hopefully want to Google bookshops in Todmorden, and if you do, you get to one, and there's something on the front page of that is a sort of a clue that lets you know you're on the right track. I think probably whatever this other title is that has come up is right there on the front page. And then you're going to be looking through that site, and it's the crossword. There's a puzzle page on the website. And if you do the crossword, I think it's the one clue that doesn't work, that doesn't fit. And that word is the password. And if you type in that password somewhere, you win the prize. I mean, the thought that anybody would even feel around inside an empty envelope, let alone do all of that. And then I met someone the other day who came to see one of the previews of Unbelievable. And he had done all of that. And he was like, yeah, I just did that and felt the braille and, didn't think anything of it. Yeah, extraordinary. So there we are. If anybody else was trying, that's what you had to do.
My question for you, based on what you just said, I mean, I know in your book you reference the lady who was at the bar, and she sort of having an episode of some sort, and you try and get her out of it and talk her out of it. When you have the people, you mentioned that you also put the warning in. Number one, did the warning actually stop those things from happening? And number two, if they did happen, how did you get around those people being upset or angry?
It greatly reduced it. There were two things that I realized. I was having more issues with people responding strangely to the suggestion and hypnosis throughout. And there was sort of some suggestion-based routines in the first half, but very light, nothing that you'd think would be upsetting. And I don't think they were, but nonetheless, it was sort of creating this atmosphere of hypnosis in the room. And I realized after 20 years of doing it and having sometimes people react badly to it, but always being able to sort it out, I realized that all that was happening was they were having a panic attack. So people that were prone to panic attacks anyway, maybe they joined in with the suggestion routine with the audience and they'd close their eyes. And then at the end, I've said, wake up and open your eyes. And they haven't been able to open their eyes. And sometimes that does happen, like if you're doing it with a group of people. Sometimes someone takes a little longer to come out of it. But I think if you feel a bit lost in a crowd of a couple of thousand people, and it is taking you a little while to come out of it, and the show's carrying on, you might get it into your head of, oh, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. And again, that might not bother a large percentage of people, but I think if you're also a bit prone to panic attacks, and then that kicks in, then you've got this sort of self-perpetuating thing. So it's a panic attack plus you can't open your eyes and you think you're hypnotized, and that's what's created it, as opposed to I'm having a panic attack and I'm telling myself I can't open my eyes. So it was interesting, and I realized that that's what it was. So that was the other thing I remember saying, don't take part in this if you're at all prone to panic attacks, and if you have any issues with PTSD. And interestingly, I think it maybe happened once or twice after I put that in, but both times it was people that ignored the warning and took part, despite the fact that they did one or other of those things did affect them. And then as to how to deal with it, I mean, this is all stuff I talk about in the book, because I was writing notes from a fellow traveler during the day. So I was doing the show in the evening, and I wanted to write about performance, as well as like writing a show and putting it together, because not more people are doing that nowadays. And I'd sort of kind of written my book for Close Up many years ago, so I thought this would be a good thing to do. But because I was doing it during the day, I was including experiences often from the night before on stage, which is why it's quite a long book, because it was a long tour. So I thought I would include these things in the book because it was all part of the wider experience of doing the show. And there is and I wanted to sort of offer advice, because there isn't really much around for people if they are using hypnosis or anything as to what to do. And I think the answer for me is always just to be present and patient, and to just be with the person and slowly let them inch their way out of it, and to understand what their experience is well enough that you can. It's a very powerful thing when you can feed back to a person what you know they're experiencing and guide them to the next sort of stage, as opposed to thinking, oh, she just wants attention, she'll get out of it, get the bucket of water and things like that, which I've sort of heard done, which, I mean, maybe that stuff works sometimes, but to me it's just all a bit wrong. Every time it happens, I think the person's going to be angry and upset, and I'm going to get into terrible trouble for it and all the rest of it. And actually, very touchingly, it's always they're always very appreciative of the time. So in the book, I talk about a woman who gets her head stuck to the table in the bar in, I can't even remember what it was now, but Nottingham, I think. So in the interval, so there'd been some very light hypnotic stuff in the first half, and then I get a message in the interval saying this woman's got her head stuck to the bar. And I think by this point, people were starting to come back in for the second half. So I went up, and there she was, but she was furious and angry. Luckily, I say luckily, for me, I suppose she did look like she was drunk. So I don't think anybody was thinking that there was a problem other than maybe someone had too much to drink. But she wasn't, but she was oddly furious. As in like very kind of, really vitriolic about it. And I ended up sort of having to just go back and do the second half of the show because she wouldn't let me help her. She wouldn't let me even begin to help her. And by this point, she'd come off the table and she was on the floor and she couldn't get up. And I remember sort of the end of the conversation was me saying, well, okay, if you don't want me to help you, I've got to go and carry on with the show now. And she's like, yeah, okay, well, you enjoy the second half of your show. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I will. And then I'm doing the rest of the show thinking, why did I get a bit chippy with it? At the end, plus I'm doing the second half of the show thinking, I'm talking to someone about their deceased relatives' sentimental objects, and I'm thinking in the back of my head, there's a woman stuck to the floor in the interval in the bar upstairs. So then I did go up afterwards, and by this point, St. John's ambulance had been called, and the area had been sort of cordoned off, and she'd got over the anger side of it. Now she was just upset. And I could spend time with her. And then it was very different. Then she was happy for me to talk to her. And then she came out of it and everything was fine. Other than the fact, she'd been asleep for a long time. So, in a bit of an awkward position, things like that. Again, you just need to be careful and present and just really to have that experience happen to you enough times that you know how to make somebody feel okay. And that afterwards, when it's done, that continues the work, having a hug and a bit of a laugh about it and buying them a drink and just those things that just create a story of what's happened, which is really all it is. It's somebody just succumbing to a story of what they think is going on, that you make that story feel right. But unfortunately, if their friends are panicking or if we'll call an ambulance, all that kind of stuff, that really doesn't help. That's going to make a person panic so much more. So there's quite a lot of that sort of management of things. Luckily, this doesn't happen very often. And she was said she was happy. And I got a really sweet card from her and her husband, who's just sort of sat there watching the whole thing, not sure what to do, really sort of thanking me for my time afterwards, which always, surprises and touches me when, people say that as opposed to, how dare you? So yeah, that wasn't the card trick. That was just making people forget the number 7. In the first half of the show. So you never know, and you do have to take this stuff seriously and be responsible about it because you never know what people are bringing to the table.
It was such an amazing trick to see live. And it was just so wonderfully constructed. And it was a joy. Sadly, it's one of those things that you're not going to get the same reaction as being in the audience. But
no, well, we didn't know how to show it on TV, of course, that whole card to box thing, because it sort of dawned on us at some point, hang on, we're going to film this. What are you going to watch on TV? Like, there were so many layers of difficulty to that, because if it happens, if that person has crossed the stage and put the card in the box, you would see that at home. Or if you haven't, because you've been hypnotized in the moment and missed it, you certainly see it if you go back and watch it. So then why aren't you seeing it? And then really just in the end, it had to become about, this is something that happened to the people in the audience. This was what would happen to you if you'd have come and seen the show live. This was their experience, and not trying to make it an effect for people at home. So that was sort of ultimately what but we were going to, at one point, we were going to cut to me cooking at home. We were going to go 1, 2, and then it would cut to me making poached eggs and talking about the ideal way of poaching an egg. And then it would cut back to the stage, 5. And, we were playing around with all sorts of weird ways out of it. I think in the end, we just lingered on the audience and just sort of created this, here is an odd moment for the audience.
Well, it was a superb trick, and it intrigues me where you're going to go now, because that feels, in terms of the Oracle Act and Carter Box, in recent times, those are 2 of the biggest tricks. When you think Derren Brown, you think of, and sorry, his live shows as opposed to the TV stuff, you do think Oracle Act, and now that Carter Box was so well received by everyone. So yeah, I've got no idea where this is going to go. I'm intrigued to see what's in your sixth position.
Okay, I was going to go for the ending of Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was the newspaper test that is then followed by a video showing how I planted this idea throughout the whole show. And I've sort of seen that premise done so many times since, plus there's already kind of a couple of the big routines from the shows in this. So I decided not to do that and go small again. So I've gone for the ESP matchup trick. Years ago, I bought from Davenport, I bought an ESP deck. And again, this was not a known thing. You could just, you could buy your bicycle cards or you could buy ESP decks. No enormous. I think it felt like there were like 4 mentalists when I started doing it. It really wasn't a thing. And so I started doing this, just a very, very standard matchup trick. And then because I did close up for many years, and that was absolutely became the staple thing. And again, like with card at any number, it allows you, I think, once you've got a certain structure in place, to then have all the fun of it, all the fun of finding stuff that really is going to make a routine like that magical, which laughably get referred to as subtleties. But it really isn't. I mean, the subtlety is the method. That's like the small part of it. I mean, the 90% of what's going to make the magic work is all the other stuff that you can then bring to it. I've always loved it. And I haven't really done it for a while, but I think if I'm thinking in terms of, the 8 tricks that for the rest of my career would serve me, it's an easy thing to slip in the pocket. And you can really make something like that play really big. It's great. And I mean, I don't know what versions are around nowadays. I've seen, again, lots of versions of people getting very kind of caught up in mark cards and things, and like the most impossible to see marking, all of which is so sort of irrelevant to what actually makes the thing magical. As those are all things about the experience for the magician, but in terms of experience for the audience member, it's all the other stuff that's gonna matter. So I love it. And I think and I did it on stage, and David Berglass had this really gorgeous ending, not quite to this trick, but he had the match-up trick. And I'm talking about, by the way, just in case it's not clear, I'm talking about where you've just got the cards, and it's like, okay, I'll think of one, you put down the one I'm thinking of, and then I'll put down the one I was thinking of, and we'll do it again. So not the plastic thing that you're sliding cards into. But David had a really wonderful ending to that thing, that match-up trick, where first of all you'd show that the cards match. Then when you turn the thing around and the 2 columns match, then you would show that you'd predicted that. And then you would point to the picture on the back wall, which had been there all along, which was a sort of a drawing of a ship. And there's the star in the sky, and there's the cross at the top of the boat, and there's the wavy lines under the ship. And if you look, and there's the triangle of the boat, and it's the same order of things. And you've sort of been staring at this all along. So I used, I've got a picture like that at home, but I did it on Photoshop and actually did like a photograph of some people on a boat. So I could do that. I've never used it, not something I could ever go out and perform that because it's a framed photo, but I thought I'd use it at home. Of course, never did, but it's a nice looking thing. But I did use the same idea of predicting it I did the ESP matchup trick with the cards in your hand in one of the stage shows, and played around with a sort of a predicted order at the end, which really I think must have come I think from David's idea, although it didn't involve a picture or anything. But anyway, yeah, it's a lovely thing, and having done it on stage, it was perfect in its moment for like a sort of an intimate thing on stage rather than everything being big. It's a nice sort of change of texture, a bit like the nail up the nose thing I did as well. Sometimes it's quite nice to have these really kind of one-on-one sweeter things as well. So yeah, because I've done that forever. It's probably one of the first tricks I ever did, and I never fell out of love with it. So ESP, whatever it's called. Again, I don't even know what the name is for it. There's probably a lot of names for it now, but that one.
I think, yeah, ESP matchup feels like it is what it is. My question is then, so you mentioned David Berglas in terms of influence, in terms of, so if people want to start doing a version of the ESP matchup and you were to set them on that path, where would you recommend looking?
Well, I just bought the old Piatnik deck. I just remember that. It was just sort of instructions and stuff at the back and ideas for routines with, I think, Magic Christian on the front. He was a very 70s looking guy. So to him and his hair, I owe that. So yeah, again, it's such a simple idea. So I would bypass all the clever modern ones and just go back to the original Piatnik ESP deck. It's in there.
Great choice. And that brings us on to the tail end of your 8 tricks. So we're now on number 7. So what did you put in your 7th position?
Number 7, I've put the 3, again, I'm sorry, these are all mine, but it's the stuff I know. So the 3 card trick that starts the Devil's Picture Book download, which again was what I used to do. I used to do close-up magic around the tables, and if it was the kind of event where this was appropriate, I would then have my own space afterwards. Say after dinner, somewhere I just have a card table. I would just do card stuff, and the 3 card trick was, and I think it was born out of watching Tom Mulliker, one of his videos, do a trick where it's 3 people and it's like, pick a card, he spreads the deck out, and it's kind of like this lovely, quite sociable way of doing a card trick with 3 people and him around a table. And that felt like a really lovely sort of premise, not the premise for the trick, but the sort of a situational premise, a bit like why I like ACAN, as I said, but the premise of it's about your decisions from the word go. Those are the things that appeal to me often more than what the actual trick is. And I think there'll always be a place for, although it is the magician doing clever things with cards, but of a sort of, right, come on, gather around, everybody come and go around, let's do this, pick a card each, and then a really enjoyable interplay. And it's a really long trick. It's a series of effects of finding the cards, and so that was great because I could play with that over the years that I did it. And it's sort of, I just put all of the sort of sleight of handy, magic-y stuff into one long routine, made sure I had a really good ending, and then the rest of my card stuff wasn't really like that. Apart from card under box, I used to do a card under box, I suppose. That would be another kind of sleight of handy sort of premise. But yeah, that. So it's on the Devil's Picture Book. It's long, but it's like, and the reason why I'm keeping it is that it's a really handy go-to thing. If you've got some people that want to see a trick, you've got a deck of cards. That's it, and it's almost like an act in itself. So it would stand me well. If I was only going to have this small number of tricks to do in the future, I'd get a lot of mileage, I think, out of that. And if I needed to fill time as well, it would. I'm thinking very practical considerations here, but it would also give me that too. So yeah, my 3 card trick. Not much of a story around it, but as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about being at the card table after a gig, and I remember very vividly. This isn't really selling the trick, having just said that I'd do it, but it was interesting. Magically, a group of people sat there, and 2 of them were loving it, and this other guy who was being really nice was just like. He was like, I don't really, and they're like, no, you can't. That's the card you picked. Yeah, no, I know, but I'm not really following. Well, the card you picked, it's under the whatever, or it's changed to your card. And him being like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't want to be rude. I presume you just, I don't know, did a thing or changed it or put another card there. I don't know. So I don't really understand what. And he just didn't get it. Did not get the premise of a magic trick, I guess. But I didn't leave thinking, what an idiot. I just left thinking, this is all stuff we need to think about, that, somebody might be sitting there just not really just not really getting it. Like there is a level at which, we need to think about some, kind of basic stuff of what is people's experience. I've never forgotten him. The guy that just didn't quite understand the whole kind of premise of it. Because as mad as it was, that's, it's ultimately my responsibility to bring him in as well, which I clearly didn't.
Well, so I think some people, we can't always cater for everybody's experience of things. And I think sometimes I've certainly had it when I'm performing magic at an event and the same thing happens. Someone just doesn't get it. And it could be the most basic thing of, your ring was here and now it's on some keys in my back pocket. They just don't engage in it for whatever reason. Something just doesn't click. And I do think it may be just because when some people are so on their guard constantly that then they're maybe not tuned into the right part of what's happening because their mind is thinking about, okay, what's that hand doing and where's that going now and how's he trying to catch me out and what's he trying to do? So sometimes I think we just get it.
I find that when I've been brought up on stage to watch a trick, to take part in a trick, it's only happened like a handful of times in my life, but I think every time I've had no sense of what the effect is, no sense of because you're so sort of like, the lights and you're weirdly seeing the back of a performer and so many other things going on. But I did stow it away as a useful possible half method for something. Maybe the person up on stage is. I mean, it's a shame because you want to. Something I talk actually a lot about in the book is a sort of the relationship that you create with the person on stage is so important and not really ever thought about or sort of spoken about. Generally, that thing of a spectator just being like a warm prop that's sort of it. That's the end of their role. But actually, there is this other interesting thing whereby what the sort of relationship that you have with them, whether it's funny and playful, or whether it's sort of intimidating, or whether you're in Showman, someone picks up the phone and gets hypnotized and is whisked backstage and trained, and then they come out and they're showing this thing that they've learned to do backstage. There's just all sorts of really interesting things that relationship can be, which makes a massive difference to the audience's experience of a show. If they're just another person that's picking a card or inspecting a thing or, perhaps being the butt of some jokes, I mean, it's a real shame. You've really got to, when you're putting like a show together, you have to think about, texture and constantly changing tonalities throughout. And I think that's a really big area that's often missed. So I put a lot of weight on it. But yeah, I did sort of think that at the back of my mind. Maybe there's some mileage in the fact that probably the person on stage, their default will be not really following anything about what's going on, which of course can also make them very suggestible. So it is helpful.
Well, that's really a good choice for number 7, but it does lead us on to your last item, which is sad for me because it feels like it's coming to an end already, but also interesting. So what did you put in your final position?
Any guesses?
I don't know. I've literally... Wait, give us a clue. So is it from a show or is it from a project or book?
It's from a show.
Okay.
Stage, in fact.
I mean, the ending of Enigma is phenomenal, but a personal favourite, which might be a surprise, is I remember seeing An Evening of Wonders and the suit moment where the whiteboard comes up and then it's you in the suit at the end.
Oh, the switch, the gorilla switch.
That a personal favourite from being in the audience, and obviously I was young, very young, and it was one of the first of your shows that I'd seen. So that moment was just mind blown. You just can't see it coming. So
that's very nice to hear. Well, we did that in the Broadway show as well, because we basically just took the best bits from what we thought were the best bits from all the shows and put them in that. So yeah, that was really good fun. And interestingly, when you get into Broadway, there's a whole mad thing about unions. So if you do a show in the West End, there's just like 6 people involved, and everyone just mucks in and makes this thing work. It's no exaggeration to say that you might have 150 people involved in the Broadway version, and they've all got very specific jobs to press this one button, and it's a massive deal if anybody sort of treads over the line into someone else's job. So even like when we were rehearsing things, and I'd pick up a prop during the trick and put it back down again, obviously not in exactly the same place I'd picked it up, and then we'd go and rehearse it again. The natural thing, because I've just stood there, would be to move that prop back and 3 inches to the left where it was, and people would rush out with disclaimer forms, and it was someone else's job to move that, not mine, because that's someone, it's a big union problem. Anyway, so for the Gorilla Switch, obviously, as you can imagine, somewhere in the mix of all that, I'm getting changed very quickly into a gorilla suit. And that's always been just like our backstage guys, whoever isn't working, their job at that point is to get me into a suit. And if there's like 2 or 3 people doing that, I can do it really quickly. And on Broadway, they weren't allowed to touch the suit because it was the costume wardrobe assistants, I don't know her actual role, who was lovely. And she was very apologetic about it, but she couldn't let anybody else touch it. So because of that, I only had one person to get into this suit, to help me into this suit, which meant it couldn't happen very quickly. So actually the show had to change and the effect wasn't as good. And we had to rewrite this whole bit because no one else was allowed to touch the suit. So the actual me changing into it had to, took 3 times longer than it should. Anyway, yeah, that was a mad thing. No, my final choice is Coin in Hand, which I always thought actually that I'd sort of, not I, but we as a team had invented, which may or may not be the case, because Charles Gauky had a similar plot around at the same time. And I honestly have no idea which one came first, but I remember we were working on, I think it was Mind Control 2. Richard McDougall, I think, was part of that creative team. And we wanted to find something, which has also become a recurring thing with a lot of my material, is something that feels like a game that you've played for years. Something that just feels like a thing. So guessing which hand the coin's in, that old thing. And I did it on Brighton Pier, I remember. But it was a really immediately. I mean, obviously, it isn't a game that anyone's played before. It's not a real thing, not really. But it's just about feels like it might be. So it has since then become. It was a very good opener to the first show that I did, Derren Brown live. It's how I open my corporate act. I very rarely do any corporate acts, but when I do, it's just a great come out. Everybody stand up and let's play this game. And now, of course, everybody does it. And everyone stole it, and I presume everyone uses it as their opener. I have no idea, but it may not be much of a surprise to say it, but it is a really fun opening trick. And over the years, I have played with so many different ways of doing it. There was even a point that when it did become popular, and there were clever ways of doing it using special gizmos. That was great. I could use those and have essentially I was outsourcing my methods to other people that would make them. I could get them a lot cheaper than if I was going to make them myself. So I've gone through all sorts of ways of doing it, and I've sort of settled on something which I think I can confidently say no one else is doing, and that was. But it's something I'd never not do. I think between that and the Oracle, that would give me an act. That would give me a show, and I'd be mad to lose it. I think it's also been a fun one to play with, getting it wrong, and because again, it's like sorry to get back to the book again, but these are all things, because I've thought about them a lot, they're all things that are in the book, but a thing that's important to me is I think you want to see, as an audience member, going to a show of any sort, whether you're seeing an actor or a dancer or a singer or a magician, you want to connect with a human being. That's really what it's about. And the trouble with magic is that everything you're doing is superhuman. So it really gets in the way of that. And it gets in the way of great drama and affecting people the most, because if they want to connect with a human and you're superhuman, then where are you sort of struggling? Like, where does that come into it? Teller's spoken a lot about this, that, magic's very bad drama because magicians are god figures. And if you can click your fingers and make anything happen, then there is no drama. And what we like dramatically are heroes. And those are people that struggle, or they're aiming for something, but maybe end up somewhere different from where they thought they were heading to, and so on. And I think these are all things to somehow think about and incorporate, because irrespective of the craft that we're presenting, we're wanting to surprise and engage and entertain and take people on some sort of journey. And I think it's just very hard to do that if just time and time again you're Mr. Amazing or Mrs. Amazing or Ms. Amazing or just an amazing person. So, and I remember in one show I did, the pen lid got stuck on them. I had a marker, those big fat markers we love to use, and the pen lid wouldn't come off. It just would not come off. And I can hear them scurrying around backstage trying to find a replacement pen, and they couldn't. And it just happened to be reviewed that night. And the reviewer made, I think he maybe thought I did it on purpose, but just that the most human aspect in the show for him was when we couldn't get the lid off this pen. I've since used it as a method because it's a very engaging moment and no one's thinking about anything else if you can't get the lid off a pen. And I remember watching Uri Geller do a show in Cardiff, and for a number of reasons, I sort of didn't really love the show, but a moment I really loved was when he had to put his glasses on to look at a broken watch that someone had brought up. And it was such a lovely human moment. And I think whatever that is, however you find it, whatever sort of vulnerability that is, because there's magicians struggle in what, like a escapologist struggles to escape, but that's not real. That's not like real life struggling. That's sort of pretend theatrical struggling. But actually watching a human being trying to do something that's difficult is so important. And actually, I think mentalism can lend itself to that. There's no reason why magic shouldn't, but I think mentalism can and should. I think it's just not always done very, very well. But anyway, all of that is to say that failure is so important. And if I've done a show and everything's gone too well, I will fail on purpose. I mean, you have to choose your moments. Or if I'm if I'm trying to read something from somebody and it's a really tense moment and somebody sneezes and the audience laughs, it makes no sense for me to then go back and get the information I was trying to get. So maybe I'll just have to let it go that night, even though maybe I know what it is, but I'll have to let it go and sort of, sorry, that was an unfortunate moment, not your fault, and make a joke about it. But then it's a real thing. You couldn't get it that night because someone sneezed. Like, why wouldn't that make me fail? And all of that's so much more interesting. Guess Who, which was one of the, or Guess Whom, which was one of the tricks in an early show. I'd get 4 people up, and I think this was a note from Andy Nyman, who said, I think maybe one night, maybe I'd sent somebody back. They were just, for some reason, or maybe he just said it anyway, but he basically said, send someone back every night. It's so interesting when you do that. It's not going to work with you. And more than anything else, I have people bring that up years later. I came up on stage and you asked me to sit back down again. Why was that? What was it about me that you just took one look and knew it wasn't going to work with me? Or people saying, the night you did it, I saw a guy and he came up and you could tell immediately it wasn't going to work with him and you sent him back. All that stuff is so interesting and has nothing to do with the tricks. They're just human moments of difficulty or whatever. So failing with a coin in hand, really interesting. Failing and having to give the money that you've bet on it, really interesting. And so that question of, it's going to fail anyway. Like, you got whatever method you're using for it, it's going to go wrong at some point. So what do you do with something like that if it goes wrong? Well, you don't want to just be a bitch about it or sort of have to backtrack and do all those horrible things that we do and we don't know what to do. So having an elegant way out of it that actually serves the show and doesn't feel like an embarrassment, to the point that you might choose to do it sometimes on purpose anyway, I think is interesting. Maybe not with an opening routine necessarily. Like maybe the opening routine, you want to be kind of nice and slick. But I think these are important things to think about. And I've certainly played with failure in that routine to see how it goes down. And I think it's great. I mean, you're starting a show with this thing clearly being real. And that thing of the night we were in, it didn't work, and he lost 50 quid or whatever is really interesting, I think.
Well, it sort of lends itself to something that you said earlier as well, when you mentioned, and I know a lot of musical theatre has moments like this, in which there's like a moment where you corpse and you almost break character. And that's the night that Derren started laughing. And it feels like a really human moment that everyone in the theatre is having that experience on that one night at that time.
And you've seen a lot of musical theatre, in which case it's excruciating.
Yes, it's all of them.
Turn their back. It's just awful. It's one of Andy and my running jokes about that, the bad corpsing moment. But yeah, no, I get your point. Yeah, no, it is important. And also when things do go wrong and people think it's part of the show anyway, it's just anything that brings people suddenly to a very present moment and snaps them out. Well, one of the nicest things I've heard was from Jeremy Dyson, who co-wrote Ghost Stories and co-directed that and wrote, of course, League of Gentlemen, and works with Andy a lot. So it's something that Andy told me that Jeremy had said, which is to do the whole show imagining that you've got someone in the audience and they're just reaching for their hat and coat under the seat to leave. And you've got to keep them in their seat. It's like they're just about to sneak out. They're going to grab their stuff and go. What do you do that makes them, okay, sit back for a bit and watch for a little bit longer? So really, I think it's a really good image because it makes you keep things changing and different and surprising. And even if it's just your tonality, just your voice changing, keep that guy in his seat.
Well, it's a great last choice. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people attribute to Which Hand to you. And I actually quite liked, you had a version, I guess it's not quite a Which Hand, but you had a thing, I think again it was on a pier, with a ring in a box. And it was just basically like a Which Hand thing, and they had to guess which one it's in. And that was also a lovely way just to take a 50-50 plot and make it feel like it was interesting and intriguing.
I love those. I love those simple plots. If it's one of these two things or one of these three things. And I think maybe the first one I did of those was in the first Mind Control show, and it was envelopes with money in one of them. It was like, I'm trying to remember the plot. It was like there's 50 quid in one and not in the other, something like that. And it went up to 500 and went up to, and Andrew O'Connor remembers it because I just kept going with it, and they were like, "No, stop!" Because I kept going, and kept winning, and that was that. It was the first time I did it, and I got a real taste for it after that. I really, really enjoy the kind of simple thing. Is it this or that? No, okay, we'll do it again, but this time is it this or that? No, okay, and it's where all the smugness can come. Of course, it's like you're just like, yeah, no, you're stupid, I'm clever. That is unfortunately the subtext. So it's not ideal from that point of view, but it's a really fun thing for as a premise, and it's sort of thing that served me well over the years.
Well, I was just going to say, even throughout, when you think about a lot of your shows, you have Shoe in a Box, or Where is Derren's Shoe? Sorry, you have the money at the box in the two boxes at the front. Where they have, and I mean, Andy has a great effect on one of his now it's a download, but on Get an Iman with just two chairs and there were two envelopes, and he says, if you come down this way, and the whole thing is you will sit here, you will sit in the other chair. But those 50-50 plots, you're always you and your team are so good at coming up with ways to make them so much more interesting and intriguing, when really it's just a 50-50.
It's a 50-50, yeah. It's Yeah, I mean, obviously they suffer from, oh, go on, do it again, okay, do it again. So it needs that, but it can work very well as a way into something. So I was on the Seth Meyers late night show, whatever it is in the States, and I was doing marketing stuff for the Broadway show. And the first round of that was, here are two colors, one green, one yellow. I've always loved like that sort of colored cards in mentalism, that slightly kind of 70s, just really low tech stuff. So colored cards, choose one or the other. And then he chooses one. And on the back, it says, you'll choose this one, which of course feels like a gag. And on the other one, it says, but not this one. As then a way into a bigger thing. So you need to take it. They don't sit very well on their own, because then, you want to, show, okay, let me do that again, show it to me again. So that went into something else. So the only other thing is how you then make it bigger and bigger and introduce. So, although it's Stephen Merchant as well, there was a routine in one of the TV shows with him, choosing yes or no. Again, I think I've seen that trick around a bit in the shops. So yeah, it's really good fun, because again, you've got, the trick is giving you the framework, and then after that, it's all the kind of the interpersonal situation that you can create out of it.
But that does bring us on to your two curveball items. So obviously you've had 8 items overall, but now we're going to get really difficult, because you're only allowed to have one of each. So what was the book that you took with you to your island?
Right. Well, my first thought was the Card at Any Number book, but actually, I have settled for a book that doesn't exist quite yet. I think it's been almost written, and they're having trouble getting it out. But I'm looking forward to this very much, and I don't know what it's called, but it's going to be the work of a mentalist called Ted Karmilovich, who you may or may not have heard of, Karmilovich with a K. And years ago, when I was reading Magic magazine, in the sort of the bound volumes of that, there's a huge amount of material in there. And after a while, I was just skimming through, looking for Ted's routines that he had contributed to it. And they were all awesome. So, I mean, I don't know if you know, it's something that I've done on stage. So that may mean that others are too. So you might have come across it. But it's an effect where you would say, I'm going to write down a number. This would be one way of doing it. I'm going to write down a number, and I just want to see if anybody can get close to it who's feeling psychic. What do you think it is? Okay, you, lady there. Okay, gentleman there. Okay, well, actually, you were closest. You were actually off by one, but what's your name? So this person comes down, and they can open a prediction, and it says the person that will get closest to this number will be, and it's a description of the woman, like where she's going to be sat, what she looks like, and they'll be off by one. And it's like all the most satisfying magic, it's just such a simple little shift, a little mental shift in method that creates this much bigger, more interesting question and set of questions than just, what the trick would normally be, which is how did he know what number they were thinking of? And so that's Ted's, as are a number, and anything he comes up with is just, I saw him do a wonderful, I shouldn't say, it was at a convention, but I think everything that happens, it was at the PEA, which is a Paper Exchangers Anonymous, the Psychic Entertainers Association in America. And he did a couple of things there that were gorgeous. Anyway, I shouldn't say. But so I'm really looking forward to this book coming out. I wrote a little blurb for it on the back, and that was a long time ago, and it hasn't arrived yet, which is making it even more enticing. But I think he's wonderful and a real giant in that world, but not somebody that the current crop of mentalists would have ever heard of, I'm sure. So it's that. It doesn't exist yet, and I don't know what it's called, but it's Ted Karmilovich's book, his collected works, or whatever they're going to call it. That will keep me going for a little while. I'll definitely read that. And the last book that I read actually was Eugene Berger's late posthumous book, which I started and was really enjoying. And then we moved house and stuff. And I need to get back to it. It's in storage, but I very, very rarely read magic books nowadays, but Burglass, Eugene's, the only two that I've read over the last probably 20 years, but Ted's one I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's nice to have something that's not out yet that we can sort of keep our eyes out for. So 100%. And Eugene's book we've had before. And certainly in the beginning of that book, we've spoken about it on the podcast before. There's a really interesting moment where Eugene has written a letter knowing that when you're reading it, he's going to have passed on. So he's talking to you from the afterlife, which again is this really weird moment when you're reading it, knowing that he was writing it, knowing that he was going to be passed on. It's all a bit crazy, but amazing at the same time. It's a lovely way to look back and feel like he's still talking to you, which was lovely. But it does bring us onto the real curveball item, your non-magic item that you use for magic. So I'm always interested where this one's going to go. We've had nothing too scandalous so far. So what are you going to go for?
It was really important to me to end this list with something dull. So I took this question to mean, again, I can only do this few tricks the rest of my career. I'm out doing those things as an act. What non-magical item can I not be without? And a thing that I cannot tour without, or a thing that I can't not do when I'm touring, is write. So I spend my days writing, and I wrote notes from a fellow traveler during the 2 years of doing Showman, and it is largely a journal of that. But with previous shows, I wrote Happy and all, I think all, well, certainly every year, I think when I've toured, I've been writing. So I don't think I could do the tour without that. And it's the most wonderful sort of rhythm of sort of like sitting in a coffee shop, typing away during the day, and then going out and doing a show in the evening. It's very bad for your posture. So that's why I have to go and see physios and things, because you're going from hunch like that to ta-da, and then you hurt yourself as you get older. So it's my laptop, I'm afraid. I mean, I cannot think of a worse answer, but I really struggle to think of what else, really, what things I use in magic performances but nothing came to mind. It was a very tricky one to answer, but I knew the honest thing was that I couldn't imagine being without is something that would allow me to write, and that's always been the other half of the touring experience for me. So I'm so sorry to finish on that, but I'm afraid that is God's honest answer.
No, I think that's a brilliant thing to have put down. And it's certainly something that I think after reading your book and previous books as well, I think that people will be very happy with that. I think even on a desert island, I'm sure you have lots of interesting things to put forward to the community.
Oh, thank you. It's been a really interesting thing to think through all this. It's also lovely because I haven't done close up for so long. Every now and then something will make me want to go back to it, and it's doing this has rekindled an affection for those, particularly for those old close up things that I don't really do anymore. And it's kind of it's something lovely about these things that just feel like they're sort of in your blood and have been for a while. That makes me miss it too. So thank you.
Well, thank you for giving us your time. But if people want to find out more about you, what's coming up, I'm sure you've got big things in the pipeline, including your book. Obviously, if people want to find out how to get the book, where can they go to?
Well, I'm selling it privately at the moment. So I'm selling it on my website. I sort of I've taken some time out after Showman, so I've been mainly painting. And I sell prints of my painting on my site as well, and this book. So we've just launched the second printing of it. The first one sold out really quickly, and I think it was hard for us to keep up with the demand, and that created all. So we're a bit like we've got more of an infrastructure this time. So really, it's that. Other than that, I'm probably taking some time out. I've got a podcast that I do, and we're starting to think about another show, what another tour would be. But that would all be for next year. Nothing anytime soon that I can think of. I'm just getting my head around what the new book will be, which I'll be doing. Which I'll be probably writing next year.
Oh, I feel like that's a little exclusive that there's going to be a new one coming out. That's good. Just
yeah. I don't think this will be a magician's one. I think it was I kind of put everything I could into Notes from a Fellow Traveler, and it is big. I mean, you know, it's a big book, but I put everything in that, and I think it was really, it's huge fun, and it's really fun writing a book from a show that you're kind of doing and not having to kind of do a lot of research about other stuff, which is normally what happens. I normally have a big suitcase of books with me, and it was very nice to just have this sort of organic experience. If things were going wrong in the show, I'd be like, this would be interesting to put in the book tomorrow. Or I'd be writing stuff and working things out, finding a language for ideas because I was writing about them during the day, and then that would help with the show in the evening. So it was a very it was a really lovely thing. And because it was such a long show as well, I was going through forgetting my lines and stuff like that. And that card to box trick we were talking about, having done it literally hundreds and hundreds of times night after night, weirdly, that's when you start to forget your lines and stuff, right? When something becomes just rote, when you step out of the present and you're just repeating something rather than recreating it from night to night. And this happened. I think I had a bit of a cough as well, and I'd had some cough medicine, and maybe that had slightly set me off kilt slightly. But 2 or 3 times, I would get to the end of that trick, and I realized I hadn't done any of the method. The card was still going to be under the guy's hand. I hadn't done the stuff I needed to do to make that trick work from a mechanical, magic-y method point of view. And I just had to sort of improvise some way out of it. And that's kind of, that might not be something that people go through much, because they may not be doing as many shows. I was doing one after another. But how you find your way through those kind of situations is important, and also just how they affect. Doesn't matter how often you do a show, whether you're doing it for 12 people above a pub or 3,000 people in a big theatre. It's the same considerations, the same experiences, and the same things that are important to get right. And I think even more important if you're putting a small show together, because I think there's a thing that you don't see as a performer, and it's that moment in the audience before the show starts, as the lights are maybe going down, or maybe even before that, when you just sat there and there's an empty stage, maybe there's a chair or a microphone or something, and it's filled with this potential. And I remember when I used to watch Magic Gala shows, I remember that feeling a lot in between. An actor would come, do their thing and go, and maybe you're like, okay, they were all right. And then again, there's the mic, the empty stage, and you're waiting for the next one. And there's a real sense of oh, wow, who's going to come out? What's it going to be? What's it going to be like? And more often than not, your anticipation of it isn't quite met by the human reality of whoever comes out. But then you can tell in a matter of seconds if they come out and they've got it. You immediately feel comfortable with them. Someone else might come out and you just you're kind of cringing. But just that bristling feeling of potential and how it's met or not met in those first few seconds, all that stuff I find so exciting. So actually doing a little show above a pub or wherever for a small number of people, I think actually that feeling is intensified, because everybody feels much more sort of visible, and it feels more exclusive, and there's a level of that feeling which you might not get if you're sat at the back of a couple of thousand people in a big theatre, and yet again it sort of gets missed, because as a performer you might just be thinking about the tricks, which is understandable, but they're really only a part of this experience that you're giving people, which is started before you step out on stage. So I think this is all the really important stuff. And it doesn't really get particularly spoken about that much, or sometimes it gets spoken about, but you don't really trust the experience of the people that are writing it. So I hope at least I've got 20 years of whatever touring under my belt, that it made it feel like these are things that are just worth passing on, and people can make use of it as they wish.
It's a phenomenal book. It is one that everyone should really have, especially, if you're someone who wants to start putting on a larger show. There are things and considerations in that book that very few people are ever going to think about before they step into that arena. And I will also just say a separate book of yours, which I loved, was Happy. And subsequently a little bit happy. I think it was either a little bit happy or a little bit happier, which was like the shortened version of it, but it's still great nonetheless. But that was a really interesting book as well, and that was sort of for those who don't know about it, it's sort of your stoic view of happiness and life and going forward. And I know a lot of magicians will probably get an awful lot from that book as well. So I know it's not a magic book and it's not a performance book, but I really do think it's another one that people should be checking out of yours as well, because it was a great book. It was really interesting, and it really makes you think about things from a completely different perspective. It's really good.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
Thank you for coming along, and make sure you pick up Derren's book. But with that being said, we will let Derren go now, because we've had him for a very, very long time. So thank you again, Derren. It's been amazing to hear your choice of ultimate tricks that you would have for forever and ever.
Thank you. Lots of love, and see you again. Bye.
But with that being said, thank you all, and we will hear from you again next week on another episode of Desert Island Tricks. Goodbye.